tell you about him. Michael is an American serial entrepreneur and co-founder of And Pizza, a creatively led, mission-driven, culture-carrying pizza chain voted one of Fast Company's most innovative companies in 2018 and 2019 for social good. Referred to by Bloomberg, as you can see on that screen, what Jesus might look like if he walked in a Yoji Yamamoto show. I love that chef, by the way. Lastoria grounds and pizza in a commitment to better flavor, quality ingredients, livable wages, and real actions. We will get into a lot of that. Michael has been on Fox Business, CNBC, MSNBC, and Yahoo, and he has been featured in a lot of magazines of Forbes, Adweek, New York Times, Washington Post. Amazing accolades and background, and we will talk about the minimum wage and the fact that how Michael has raised so far over $100 million for his venture. Michael, welcome to the show.
I did not make that easy on you, Sabir, but you nailed it. Thank you.
I do my best, you know. So before I get into And Pizza, I want the audience to get to know you, you know. Most importantly, not who is or what is And Pizza, but more like who is Michael. So if you could tell us about who you are, your upbringing, and so on, because I think it is a learned experience, entrepreneurship, but at the same time, there's also some DNA and some background in our environment that actually helps influence who we are. So Michael, take it away.
Absolutely. So I always like to use the analogy, if you've ever been to a really, 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 really small town, and then imagine it even being smaller. That's sort of the origin story of who I am. I grew up in a hamlet, which technically, in terms of hierarchy, reports into a town, which I find to be fascinating. 500 people. There was one flashing light. There was one bar. I don't even think the bar exists anymore. And it was about 60 miles south of Buffalo, New York. So technically Western New York, not upstate. And, I spent, up until the point I was 18 years old there. And it was really crazy. There was literally an Amish schoolhouse that was, about 200 yards from my home. I took the same bus from kindergarten through 12th grade to school. And literally my school was K through 12. And my public graduating class was 35 people, all of which you can imagine we got to know quite well. And that was incredibly formative. I mean, growing up in such a rural place, seeing sort of the plight of the American blue collar worker as well as the farmer. And there were really three jobs in the economy that I grew up in. It was you were either a teacher, a farmer, or you worked in a local salt factory. And from that perspective, it's gotten really hit hard. And I've seen, just the struggles and the challenges that, the American family has, especially in rural America, and a lot of the frustration and sadness and disappointment and despair that they shoulder and bear day in and day out. And there's actually a lot of that goes into sort of the founding origin story of And Pizza, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But my way of getting out ultimately was sports. I played every sport that we could and I could get my hands on. My favorite sport was football, but the school was too small to field a football team. And I ended up getting a scholarship, ironically, to college playing tennis, which wasn't my favorite sport. I actually loved basketball and soccer more than tennis, but it happened to be the thing that could pay for an education. And packed my bags at 18 years old, went to Santa Barbara, California. And that was sort of the second chapter of my life, which was interesting. It was really, really, really different. I always joke with my mother, but when I was, I think, right around 12 years old, we only had three stations growing up, and you could only access each of the three by turning a rusty old antenna. And my dad would be in there watching TV, and I'd go out and I'd twist the antenna, and he'd yell once it got decent reception, and we could then watch whatever TV show we were watching. But it was about 12 years old that we got a fourth TV station, and it was USA Today. And there was a show called Up All Night with Gilbert Gottfried, who was the host. And all of a sudden I'm seeing images of, scantily clad men and women running in the beaches of California. I remember running into my parents' room and knocking on the door, being like, Mom and Dad, of course the show was Baywatch. Like, where is this? And they're like, that's California, son. And I'm like, I'm going to California. And it's a little Borat-esque of a moment, but it definitely helps frame and define, because it was that rural. and eventually made my way to New York City at 22. Didn't really have much going for me at the time. I was able to get a general economics and business degree with no real specialty. And the first job that I was able to get, I basically knew one person, and and she allowed me to stay with her for about a week. And I cash advanced a credit card that I had for $1,500, and I basically had $1,500 and a week to figure out a job and a place to stay. And I was able to get both things done pretty quickly, and took a job doing inside sales. So you can imagine I was making about 350 cold calls a day. It was probably one of the worst jobs I've ever had, right? Outside of being a dishwasher, which I was, at from 12 to 15. And prior to that, I had my own paper route, and realized pretty quickly that I wasn't that employable, did not want to, cut my teeth or make a career doing inside sales. And I ultimately had to start a company. And so I went to the leaderboard, the person that ultimately had the most amount of sales in this inside sales company I was working for. I won't mention the name of the actual firm itself because it was so bad, and nothing nice is going to come out of my mouth, regarding that particular experience. But I pestered the guy who was the best at sales. And finally, by the 5th time, he turned me down, offered to buy him a beer. We went and got a beer, and I was like, can you please show me? I don't have a long runway here, and any tips that you can provide me with, to help me get started here, I would love. And we ended up getting along, and that led to a couple more beers. He had to go walk his dog in Queens, and so we hopped in a taxi cab, and inside of the Lexon plastic where the old New York City subway map used to be, so you could calculate your fare, right, based on distance, someone had shoved their business card. And I look over at him, and he looks at me, and we kind of look back at each other. We're like, why is there not advertising in the back seats of taxi cabs? And so from that moment, that was the first startup. We decided that we were going to launch a taxi cab advertising company. And that was, ultimately my first gig. And I can go on and on, but that's really where, the entrepreneurship of the journey got started. It was just through pure hustle and sheer determination of figuring something out that wasn't inside sales, and knowing that my path, and I think to some extent it made it a lot easier for me, because there really was no downside to starting a company, because I already hit the down, right? So it was all upside in terms of being willing to, embark on that adventure and go down that particular path.
It's interesting. You mentioned that you were in that company and it was horrible. You don't want to even name the company. What I've found in my career and in my journey is that some of those places that give you the worst of life experiences, actually, if you look at it as a hindsight, like 10 years from now, you go like, thank God they fired me. Thank God I left. Or thank God I just met this one person in there that actually became part of my future journey.
Absolutely.
Right? If I had not done that thing, I would not be where I am today.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it exited stage left from corporate America 6 weeks after joining. So it definitely was the reason for the start. And had that been probably a better place to work, to your point, there's a high probability that I wouldn't be an entrepreneur. Yeah.
Now the thing is, when you grow up in a environment, like I'm talking about the rural community that you were in Hamlet, it defines you, starts defining you of who you are. And because you have not had the context of seeing Baywatch for the first time, for example, and going like, what is this? I've never seen this before, right? There's no beach near where you were, right? And there was no context. Were there parts of it that, I'm sure that there are parts of it, hard work and really, really working in various different sports to put you through college. I think that's a positive outcome. Were there any negative parts of it that over time you had to let go of certain things because it made you in early part of your life?
Yeah, I think, like really, really, really rural places, and you could probably say the same for urban. I think that there is, a general tone around people that leave. And so from my perspective, it was probably like the greatest place to grow up until I turned 12. And then you sort of look around and say, gosh, like I don't necessarily feel like I connect with the people in this particular community. And it wasn't that they weren't my friends, it's just that I had these big aspirations, and candidly, I'm not even sure where they came from. I just was always sort of looking outside the box, always looking to do things a little bit differently, kind of march to the beat of my own drummer. And that was in me since, the earliest days I can remember, right, being on earth. And so from that perspective, there was a lot of sort of like not feeling like I fit in, but still participating. And I think there are a lot of potential opportunities, whether it was through sort of the lack of, education in terms of like courses that weren't available, that, were some hindrances to, my academic growth. I think from an athlete's perspective, the best athletes weren't around because it was so rural. And so access to, most competitive talent or top trainers, like that just wasn't there. And so you kind of do the best of what you can, but I've always questioned, like, what would I have been able to be, as, an academic or an athlete had the stakes been higher and there was more access. That being said, right, the chances of me, right, truly being a Rhodes Scholar or being a professional athlete were low anyway. And so, the grass is always greener, but one could argue that because I knew that wasn't a path, I focused on other things that eventually got me to where I am today. But it's tough. I mean, it's tough growing up in a place that is so rural, that's so cut off. There is something very pure and innocent and special about it until you get to a certain age and recognize that you want more and you want more in life. And I would also say that this wasn't the rural America that you see on TV or watching Yellowstone, where everything is beautiful and there's a real economy there. I mean, this was the poorest county in New York State, right? These are people that, had lost a lot and were, on the decline, not on the rise. And that sort of tension, you feel it. It's in the air, right? And people aren't necessarily happy, which is why, the Buffalo Bills have such a rabid fan base, because people's, literally joy and spirits and personalities like go as the football team goes, because there ain't else a lot going on. And so from that perspective, it was tough. And it definitely gave me a sense of wanting to do something and wanting to fix that and wanting to help out sort of the blue collar, American worker and provide opportunity where opportunity didn't exist. And so there's definitely a soft place in my heart, and I learned a lot. And I think it was very defining in terms of who I am as a human being. Still I'm a bit, naive, even though New York City has knocked most of that out of me over the past, couple of decades, but, still approach things like I'm approaching them for the first time and still have a lot of optimism and a lot of belief that people are good and there's a deep amount of humanity inside of everyone, even if they have a lot of walls or barriers they put up. And I really approach life with an incredibly glasses half full optimistic approach, because, I truly believe that we are good people and we do care about one another. As much as this country is massively divided, it's not, right? The people I grew up with in rural America, the people I live with and spend time with in New York City, they're not that different, even though one is super red and super all right, and the other is blue and super, far left. We're the same people. And at the end of the day, we see very similar. We just want to fit in. We just want to have a group of people that we're connected to and that we feel like we're taking care of. It's very tribal, right? Not to overuse that word, but human connection is super important. People are just finding it in areas that maybe they shouldn't be, right? In online communities that just fester and create a lot of negative energy around things. And there's so many amazing, communities that are out there that would be a better match for that person. And I believe we're going to get there. I really do. And so that sort of is the architecture of the personality, outside of being both, right-brained and left-brained and living at the tortured intersection of both and never knowing, what side of the brain I'm going to wake up, right? Ultimately tapping into the most. Anyone out there that knows, right? I've got the business brain, I've got the creative brain as well. It's a wild place to live, and wanting to live every day to the most. So I'm definitely a maximum human being in the sense of I do a lot and I see a lot and I experience a lot, and I'm a consumer of everything. And I love that.
Related to the comment you made about Buffalo Bills, but it still does not explain one of our mutual friends, Gary V, why he loves the Jets so much. I don't know. I'm not much into sports, so I don't know the reason behind that.
Yeah, he is a rabid. Talk about one of the biggest sports fans I know. He is. I also think there's a goal there, right, in terms of him, one day owning the Jets, which he's always publicly aspired to do. There definitely is something there where, gosh, what an accomplishment that would be if he can pull that off.
Yep. I mean, it's also one of those attainable goals. It's there, and he's working towards building those kinds of things to get there. Uh,
Absolutely.
Now I want to talk about actually the taxi cab. Thanks to you, now we have ads behind every when we take the ride. So when you're going through that, I've had several ventures in my life, and each one of them I've had successes and I've had struggles and pitfalls. But the thing is, even when I'm having those things, I know that I'm learning something new, right? In one, I may not have known anything about sales tax. Another one, well, in this jurisdiction, you need to be doing X, Y, Z. You start learning those kinds of things over time, including like people and partnerships and vendors and people who tell you the truth, people who lie to you. There's you and
Oh
I
yeah.
could write several books on the subject. So with the taxi ad company, and then we will transition to and pizza. What were some of the lessons that you learned? How big did the company get? What did you learn about partnership? You said that it was you and this partner. What did you learn about partnership in that? What kind of advice you have there? And yeah, go for it. Just
Yeah,
share.
look, I mean, I think that the most interesting thing is that we actually had to make a very, strong and hard pivot about a year in. A couple of things that we learned. Number one, the process, the sales process, right, to land an out of home client was both lengthy, and because we were selling something new, incredibly time consuming from an education perspective. And so we got this stood up in about 5 cities. And the make or break was we were at the final stages with the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission, and Clear Channel comes in right over the top the 11th hour, right? Basically pays the entire system off and put in, right, the first iteration of the taxi TV. And so from that perspective, we realized pretty quickly the future is actually going to be in technology. We were not like technologists, right? We weren't going to like physically create, nor did we have the capital to do so. And so we actually shifted and started focusing on digital, and we're one of the early companies in ad tech and customer acquisition. And from that perspective, then we ended up building, a self-optimizing ad serving network. And this was at a time where websites that had a decent amount of traffic but couldn't afford, right, to have a full-time ad sales team, right, to monetize the traffic. We just basically embedded code on their website, and we did all of the sales, and we built up a massive network that was heavily focused on ROI and performance. And the contracts we signed with websites is we'll just split the revenue from the advertisers 50-50. So it was super simple. And we built a network of thousands of websites, and we had all of this traffic. And we were able to then convert that into a full shop customer acquisition firm that would provide paying customers for our clients, whether it was, nonprofit or for-profit education, home services, the direct TVs, the ADTs, different CPG. And we built up a pretty big business, and it went from kind of like year one revenue, $1 million, year four revenue, just under $30 million, and about $6.5–7 million of profit. And we ended up selling that business in the fourth year because there was such demand in the category, in the space. It was funny because I remember a guy who's become, one of my best friends, Sanjay Chadha, who ran a boutique marketing firm called Pets v Prunier. They were acquired by Canaccord, and now he's one of the leading investment bankers in the country. Has just a massive business. But inbound phone call from him right around 2013, and he was like, or 2014, he was like, "Would you ever consider selling the business?" And at the time, I was so naive, I didn't even realize that was necessarily a thing, or that there was even a market for the business. But right time, right place, right product, and he then worked with me and my co-founder, Ian Gray, who now lives in Costa Rica, has an amazing life, and is doing his thing. And he worked with us, coached us, and really helped develop the business to something that could be sold. And we had a full process. We got 13 indications of interest, whittled it down to about a handful of term sheets, and we got a deal done. And we subsequently went through, myself as CEO, Ian exited the business, went through then 2 acquisitions and a merger, and left that business at the literally exact day of my 3-year contract, because reporting into private equity wasn't my thing. And then I realized I wanted to do more creatively. And so I co-founded an ad agency with, my best friend and business partner, Doug Jacob, which we ended up building and having a lot of fun working on every single cool brand that you could imagine, working with founders, working with management teams, and really helping, put more juice into or life force and energy into the very brands that we touched. And that's one of my favorite things, is making a founder or CEO fall even more deeply in love with the very thing that they're building or that they created, because you make it look and feel a certain way that they didn't even imagine was possible. And I got a lot of reward from that. We ended up actually selling our advertising agency to a large Japanese beauty conglomerate called Shiseido in 2017. Oh, wow. So that ended up becoming my second exit. And, we just had a lot of fun with that business. And you can imagine two guys with beards in Japan now selling our agency, working on cosmetic brands, right? Because Shiseido's got a whole bunch of them. For the audience, it's Bare Minerals, Buxom, NARS, Clé de Peau, Laura Mercier, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a $20 billion company. And so it was pretty ironic, and just the experience of going through building a second thing very differently. And one thing for the audience to know is, once I've done something, like, I could have made a lot more money just doing what I had done in my early and mid 20s on the customer acquisition side and the ad tech side, because as you can imagine, ad tech has become a monster. But I had done it once, and it wasn't interesting to me, right? I wanted to scratch a creative itch. I wanted to try, my hand at something very different, because to me, I love the process of learning. Sabir, you just talked about this a little bit earlier, the intellectual curiosity around like what's under that rock and wanting to go explore it and to touch it and to taste it and put my hands on it and say, oh, is this what I want to be doing long-term? Ultimately realized I didn't want to be in the ad business long-term either. I wanted to launch a brand that had true purpose. And that's sort of the origin story of And Pizza.
So what were the steps there just before getting to And Pizza? So the ad tech is done. Your second exit happened. Now it's nice and quiet. You took your vacation. I don't know if you take vacations. Took your vacation.
I did. Yeah, I shut my brain.
It's very hard as entrepreneurs, So you go from there. Now you're transitioning. You go like, you know what? I still have the itch. I need to do something different. How did the idea of And Pizza come about? I mean, were there other examples? I mean, I'll share something with you that I've shared before. In season 1, I had Gabby Lewis, who I'm sure from Magic Spoon cereal. Their first product.
I love Magic Spoon.
It was not a breakfast cereal. It was edible crickets, edible insects that they wanted to promote in the United States.
Wow.
And then it transitioned to becoming a keto product that was this delicious keto cereal that you buy right now. So what was that journey like before you landed on, it's going to be pizza?
Well, there's a couple of things. I think the idea of, launching, having worked in the service side of the business, and Pizza happened, while I was still, co-founder of an ad agency. So it was sort of during that process, having worked on a lot of really cool brands, wanting to have your own sort of bite at the apple. And, kind of going back to, my upbringing, wanting to create a business that had a set of values that I could aspire to become as a human being, but also, a business that was really focused on solving what I was seeing, which was the lack of good jobs in America, and largely like good jobs, whether it be the blue collar worker or the hourly worker. America has a massive hourly workforce that oftentimes is largely ignored. Not that companies don't rely on hourly labor, because they do, but ignored in the sense of, well, what does it mean to be a real good jobs provider? And this idea around this ampersand, both in terms of like uniting this country, around key social issues, lifting up the lowest wage workers in the country. And so there always was the and before there was pizza. And it was kind of this like big goofy symbol, like why would a brand lead with an and? What does it mean? And I think, people that know the company, that have spent time to learn it, understand it, it really is the symbol of unity. And it really is about uniting the working class. And it's a really cool thing, because oftentimes brands sort of reverse engineer, an actual like iconic logo or a symbol or a purpose. Like this actually started, the origin story started with the symbol, which you see ironically right behind me. And then it became about food service and ultimately pizza. And there are a couple of stats that are really important to understand. Number one, the food service industry is the largest employer in America, We employ over 10% of the workforce in this country. Huge, huge, huge employer. Second is the restaurant industry is the second largest private employer outside the federal government. And so this idea that, okay, we used to be a manufacturing country, now we're becoming largely, right, a food service in terms of the jobs as a percentage. Well, one thing that manufacturing did well, even though I wouldn't define those as quote unquote good jobs, really bad for the health, they were higher paying jobs. They paid on average $25, $26 an hour. And those are being replaced by food service jobs that are paying barely, call it $10, $50, $11 an hour on average. And so there's a massive just structural shift in where jobs are actually being provided and what they're paying versus what they were before, that has resulted in massive amounts of income inequality that no one is really addressing. And so we sought out to address, can we be the case study? Can we be the spark, right, in food service that changes the way that people think about what it means to be an employer? And can we define what it means to be a good jobs employer, first starting with our own body of work as a giant experiment and case study, and then knocking down everyone's door and trying to, whether it's through federal legislation, local legislation, or just private businesses doing the right thing, right, trying to kind of like will our body of work upon one another. And that's sort of where we are at in coming up on year 10. We are really focused now on larger scale impact, but that's why we got into food service. Now, the pizza side of it, that was the capitalist in me, right? That was looking at an industry that was fragmented, that was antiquated, that was largely regional and subscale from a brand perspective, and seeing, right, the epic rise of a Domino's. Well, the reality is, like, Domino's gets so much credit for being like tech enabled, and the tech isn't that great. Like, if you get an order from Domino's delivered, they're still not able to track the pizza from point A to point B. You get the average of the time in a region it takes to deliver, and that's how they're using their promise times. And this is a day and a place where, like, you can track your delivery driver or your courier, right, from any marketplace that you order off of. And they don't have the tech, but they had such an epic run in terms of value creation because they were competing in an industry where there wasn't much competition, right? With a little bit of effort, you can have massive outside impact. And I love that about it. Also, as a creator, there's nothing more fun than, being able to market pizza, right? You can have sort of carte blanche, do whatever you want, say whatever you want. Like, it's a lot of fun as an industry with a lot of amazing people. But tons of, look, like Domino's literally came out and said our pizza sucks, and they made it like a little bit better. And then boom, right? 10 years, I think one of the best performing stocks on the public market, right? You're seeing Papa John's like do a little bit better, just don't suck. And they're having unbelievable performance. That's the upside in pizza. And by the way, outside of the top 4 that we know, right? Domino's, Papa John's, Little Caesars, Pizza Hut, like, there's massive white space. The other 46 of the top 50 pizza chains in America, you may know 1 or 2 of them, or maybe you grew up around one, but there's just not nearly as much competition as one thinks. And no one is solving for, which is what we're doing, how to reintroduce pizza as a lunch option. And that's what makes the business so interesting, why it's shaped the way it is, why we have the ingredients. We actually have a huge, vegan, vegetarian community that supports us because we made pizza accessible as a lunch option. That really helps our unit economics because we're a 50% lunch, 50% dinner business. And the biggest and best QSR brands out there have at least 2 day parts. If you think about McDonald's, right, doing $2.5 million per location, no one, quote unquote, will admit that they go there. A lot of people go to McDonald's. And a lot of the reason for that is that that's a breakfast, lunch, dinner, late night. It's basically a 24-hour occasion that really helps drive sales and drive success, even though the product and the brand is dated and needs some dusting off. Like, that, structurally speaking, is key to success in QSR long-term. So you've got you've got the pizza, they come together, they make up a super goofy name, but we love it. And we have a North Star that we run every single day, every decision against. And we are really, truly, through our core, a purpose-driven company that wants to do everything we can to democratize the decision-making, to uplift our hourly workers, and to build, a real body of work and evidence that we can take to the masses to change what it means to be an employer in food service. And I think that has the opportunity to change and impact so many people's lives, because when you're paying them more, when you're treating them the way a human being wants to be treated, with dignity, with respect, with empathy, right, with humanity, like it changes the way people feel about themselves, about their families. They have access to things they didn't access before. And when you give people that, you watch them thrive. And it's the most fulfilling thing that you can do, is lifting up other people and knowing that you played a small part in that.
So there's a lot you said there, and I need to unpack a lot of it, Number one, Michael, as the ed tech digital guy, right? Running an agency, all right? Very digital. You're sitting in front of it's very boring, right? You go into the office,
it's
you're in
computer.
front of a computer, in front of your Mac, and you're moving pixels, versus hard labor with flour and water and salt and all of those things, tomatoes, and making sure the tomatoes are the right tomatoes, all of those very much hands-on stuff, how was that transition from the ad tech executive owner, Michael, to pizza man, Michael?
Yeah, I think my friends thought I was absolutely batshit crazy. They're like, wait, you're doing what? You're going to go you're going to go open a pizza shop? And it was hard for people to comprehend, because it's very rare to go from a digital business to an analog business, right? I think everyone wants to get into digital because there's significantly more scale. But for me, again, the purpose, the mission, right? And I just threw myself into it, and I worked every position in the first pizza shop for about 9 months. And ended up probably collectively spent probably a year and a half of the 10 years, like actually physically clocking in and clocking out of a pizza shop. And you learn, I think, the importance of doing that, at least as an entrepreneur, of getting your hands. I think it's so important, because the things that we've set up and how we architected the actual four walls of the pizza shop, that wouldn't have happened if I wasn't physically there doing every job and figuring out, like, what's our way of doing this, right? Versus hiring a team to do it. I was shoulder to shoulder and understood not only about what it was like, what life was like as an hourly worker in food service, and that like helped define, what it meant for us as a brand in terms of our policy, but also, learned all of the ways that we were going to like build something on the most solid possible foundation. Our entire cooking platform is ventless and electric, which means we're saving probably $100,000 on a per location build in actual capitalized costs, like, because of the way that we architected. We figured out how to make a very good product on what looks like a very shitty oven. And the reason for that is we wanted the entire platform to be ventless, right? And we've basically architected and built our own, this is something you'll appreciate, Sabir, we built our own software stack, right? We have an actual like technological engine that runs the operations of the business and makes it really, really simple to operate an and pizza, which is going to be the key for us to scale, but also eliminating unnecessary tasks and hours so that our like employees, we call fam members, right, can actually focus on fewer things, do them more intentionally, and bring more personality to the job, because you don't have to have a specific set of skills to work at an and pizza. We hire for personality, we hire for values. Like, those are the most important things to us. We can teach you how to operate or even how to run a pizza shop. And so from that perspective, it allows as a recruiter, as an employer, so much more autonomy, over how we build, our systems and how we employ. And that's a really cool thing and really exciting. But it all started off because you got to go do the work. You got to go do, right, the heavy lifting and the ditch digging to understand how you're going to make it your own and build a moat around that intellectual property, by actually literally touching every aspect of the business.
So, Michael, the pizza man, is in his first location, right? Getting the lay of the land. Now, to me, it feels more like any other pizza joint, right? It's a family business, right? Everybody knows each other. It's the location one, only one location. There are plenty of pizzerias near my home. They have been around since I was in high school, and I'm not that young, by the way. I look like a 15-year-old. I'm not, I'm 50. What happens when you go from, I think now you're about 60 locations, more than 60 locations?
Yeah, we have 60, and we're actually opening 4 locations between today and the end of 22. So we're starting to get that scale.
Like what is that? 60%
Yeah,
increase.
pretty significant growth.
Yeah. Now, if you go from one store to now you have two stores, there are no two Michaels, because maybe you had a humongous influence on culture, the way you work, all of those kinds of things. So what happens from 1 to 2 to 3? Because I'm sure that you had a ton of learning from that.
Yeah, and the way that the business typically works, and it's good to understand because very few brands or companies even make it. Like once you get to 100 locations, especially from a company owned and operate, because we're not a franchise, which is a much faster way and less dilutive way to grow and scale. We chose to do it even the harder way, right? We operate every single shop. And so from that perspective, it makes it a lot more difficult. But again, we also have control. And so, any changes that we want to implement, right, we can implement that a hell of a lot faster, both in terms of our communications platform, which is text only, which we'll talk about a little bit. But you kind of go from one, you get it right, you massage it, you work through all of the kinks, and then you capitalize yourself for 3, right? And then you go from 1 to 3, and then you massage it, and you work out all of the kinks. Then you go from 3 to anywhere from 8 to 10. Right. And these are kind of like the tranches of fundraising and then you go from 8 to 10 to 25, then 25 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to about 250, 250 to, 500. And then you go up to 1,000. Like that's sort of how these scale in terms of understanding addressable market and where the hurdles are that you have to get through, which is why as we're going from 60 to 100, right? Kind of fits the mold. Everything is different, right? The business is completely different at one location is at 3, completely different 10 than it is 3, right? 25 than 10, 50 and 25. And so it's just making sure that you're hiring for that next phase of growth, that you're hiring ahead of the growth, that you're working through the kinks in real time. That's also why I love company-owned model, right? And also why you see such mediocrity at scale in franchise systems, because the idea that you can mass replicate a thing that you yourself haven't scaled, grown, or even worked through the kinks is crazy to me, right? There are literally franchise systems out there where they'll have 1 or 2 company-owned locations and they'll franchise, and there's hundreds of them. It's wait a minute, you think that you really got it that right in the first 1 or 2 locations, that everything is going to be a playbook? And the problem is it's really hard for innovation. I use the example of Five Guys. It took them 3 years to roll out a milkshake program, right? Because the franchisees didn't want to make the capital investment in the equipment, because they were done investing in the business when sales went up and then started to come down a bit, right? Because operators, especially franchise, they're focused on one thing, which is returning their invested capital. Oftentimes a loan from a bank, right, to open up a single location or maybe a couple of them, they're purely focused on profitability, right? And so you lose a lot of the humanity, you lose a lot of the innovation, you lose a lot of the tech enabled, because everything requires buy-in and investment from your partners that are operators that may not have the 5 to 10 or the 15 to 20 year vision about and real product roadmap and pipeline that great companies do, because no matter how much you invest in R&D, you may not have the ability to convince your operators or franchise system to do anything with it. And so very, very, very important that you are hyper-focused on building a business model, an architecture of a model that's going to be highly relevant as times change, right? We were paying, right, well above the minimum wage, right? We architected a model. Our average wages system-wide right now are 16, and we have a path to get them closer to $20 an hour, wow, right, by the end of 2022. No one's paying that in food service, but it's because we started off and built the model around higher wages, built the model around higher, right, costs in our supply chain to provide a better quality product. Everything that we do, throw as much expense as you can, and then try to make it work. And so you've got a lot more cushion. And now you see so many brands, especially in fast food, QSR or fast casual, whatever you want to call it. It's just fast food that are going to be very challenged because they're not going to be able to make the labor work in their P&L when they're forced to pay people, which they are now based on the quote unquote, right, so-called labor shortage, which to me is really a wage shortage, and workers finally voting with their feet that the juice isn't worth the squeeze. It's a massive issue to address in restaurants right now, that we've done such a job and been such shitty employers. People don't want to come work for us. And so as a result of that, we've got a hard reset on how we treat people, how we approach it. This is part of the And Pizza Good Job, because we're not having staffing issues, right? And we're opening 40 locations. We've opened 20 locations in the last 12 months. We're not having staffing issues, right? Because we built a brand around being an employer that gives a shit about its people, like really does. Every single employee has my cell phone number. I'm constantly texting with people. Our entire communications platform is done via, we can keep our ear to the ground and to actually be human and communicate with human beings the way they want to be communicated with, right? Not some bad game of telephone. And that matters. That really, really, really matters. And so I do think, Sabir, it's one thing that, and anyone that follows me on social media, I know I'm hyper annoying with this stuff, but it's constantly beating the drum of, we've got to change things, because if we don't change things, you're going to see more than a third of restaurants closed intra-COVID during the pandemic. You're going to see more and more closures, the inability for people and companies and small businesses to staff because they've got the mindset wrong. And we've got to fix that. People don't always have the solutions. And so we're trying to provide them with the solutions. Not that we know better, it's we actually built a business model preparing for this. And as a result of that, we've got 10 years worth of evidence and work that says this actually works, because the issues that you're dealing with, we're not dealing with them on the same scale. And yes, did we used to get 1,000 applications per location? We did. Now we get 100. But I know from restaurant operators out there, they're getting 0. And like, how do you solve for 0 applications? It's a real crisis out there. And it's crisis because, Sabir, this industry is the largest employer in our country.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
You know, it's interesting. At the beginning of COVID last year, right? I was watching, I think something came across my feed on whether it was Instagram or TikTok, something like that. And there was a fast food worker. She said that, you know, I have to be here in order to make food for you, but I'm not treated well. I'm not treated well. I'm not given the right amount. And you expect me to be safe with your food. You know, that's where the disconnect is. Like, we don't think about like the person who is making our food. We want to make sure that they're treated well so that we're getting the right, type of food, the right quality of food, safe food, all of those kinds of things. And we just don't think about those things. I mean, I think we, and it's interesting that you brought up the minimum wage question. Every time I think about food industry, I always think about, because that's the narrative in media right now, right? It's always about minimum wage. Whenever you talk about minimum wage, the first conversation comes up has to do with the food workers, right? And I think for a lot of them, the bigger employers in the food industry may have hired a lot of like kids from junior high and high school and stuff like that. And then to them, a minimum wage is good, but there are people who actually live on that and have a family, and it becomes very difficult. And kudos to you for tackling that and creating an amazing culture around and pizza with that, you know.
Well, one thing I've found is that there's a lot of chatter, and you'll hear it from, some of the biggest CEOs in the space, and they'll talk a really good game about really caring about their workforce. But the reality is, they're focused on the P&L, and they're not really focused on what life is like, right, for the lowest paid people in their company, and how are they actually making ends meet. So a lot of the things that we do, number one, we include, right, our employees in the benefits in terms of how we land at what we offer, right? So we do have healthcare. We are paying and subsidizing rideshare transportation. There's not a company out there that's paying their employees, right, to get to work and back in a partnership with Lyft from a ride sharing perspective. We provide paid time off for activism. We provide paid time off for voting, right? So it's not just about paying higher wages. It's about giving opportunity to do something differently, to get out there, right? To meet people that care about similar causes, to participate, right? In one of the most important civic duties in this country. And so there's just a big disconnect in terms of what people should be doing, what they are doing. And we've got to address it, because again, what I find to be so fascinating is that the argument against higher wages, right, was always it's going to, be an impediment on growth, right? Small business owners just won't do it. The juice won't be worth the squeeze. It's going to result in a net, fewer jobs. I mean, I've heard everything. And the reality is, what I tell people now is that it doesn't matter what your perspective perspective is, because if you can't staff your restaurant, you don't have a business, right? And so to some extent, the market is making a hard correction that has been a long time coming because the federal minimum wage hasn't moved, right, in well over a decade. It's still $7.25 an hour. There are states that pay below the federal from loopholes. Like, it is a real issue. And now I've actually got people listening because they're saying, well, we can't staff our shops. What do we do? What do we do? And it's like, well, what you should have done 10 years ago is this, but here are the things that you can start doing today. And one of the things I tell people is that, how about you start shifting your marketing dollars for your consumer brand to your employees and start focusing on your employer brand? The easiest thing that you can do, where it's not going to cost you any more, right? Stop putting all of the spend on your consumers and start putting the spend on your employees. And everyone's like, oh, wow. Like, I didn't even think about that. Shift the dollars in the P&L. There's plenty of opportunity, and start getting ahead of it. I believe if you're not on a path to $20 an hour by the end of 2022, and maybe it happens sooner, maybe a little bit later, like, it's going to be a real challenge. And businesses right now, and a lot of, they still think this is all going to go away, that we're 6 months away once the COVID and we are in true endemic state. It's not going to happen. Like, this is a labor revolution. This is here to stay. People are not going to go back to work. They will, but they're not going to voluntarily go back to work unless you change significantly your behaviors as an employer. And we need to get to start doing the work around what that actually means. But I got to tell you, it's going to wreak a lot of havoc on this industry. And I want to be the solution. But a lot of people still that we are where we are, and things are going to change. And I don't believe that.
You know, it's interesting that if you look at, it's all about human behavior, right? We have learned to live life under the pandemic. Thank God for the pandemic, by the way, not the disease part of it, because of all the changes that it's bringing about, right? And I think people realized how much family time was so important to them, so that when they finish taking that last call at 5 p.m., they're done with what they were doing. And at 5:01, they're spending time with their kids and not getting stuck. I live in New York. You live in New York. You know the traffic in New York. If you travel with your car or subway, it might take you 90 minutes to get home, you know? So even if 5 o'clock doesn't mean clock out, 5 p.m. means you're going to the train station, and 6:30, you're going to be home. Most likely it will be 7 p.m., you know? And in California has its own traffic issues too. So I think during this period, when they realize, oh, you know what, 5:01, I could be sitting down with my family and have an afternoon snack, and then at 6:30, I could have a meal with them, so I don't have to feel rushed, and I could spend more time with my family. I think that learned behavior is not going to change. You know?
I think you're completely right, and it's incredibly well said. In every single boardroom right now, these conversations are happening. Like, pre-pandemic, the expectation was that the employee will show up. That expectation is gone. And now the question is, what policies are right? And not what policies are right for the company, what policies are right for the employees, right, that are actually doing the work. What's going to get them to show up? What's going to make us, right, a best-in-class employer? What's going to put the butts in the seats? And those are the conversations being had right now. And that represents massive opportunity, because look, I'm a huge believer, right? As much as I pound the table and I want to see, you know, legislation around wages change, like, I do always prefer less government. It's not a great capital allocator, as you know. and from that perspective, like, I do believe that we have a real chance, right, to solve this collectively around this shift, right? This shift in this balance. People have the power, Sabir. When we organize correctly, we have all of the power in the world to change the way our governments behave. And like, this is a great example where the working class in America has an opportunity, right, to change what it wants from jobs, right? Because if you don't show up, it's going to change the way the employers behave. And so I think it's a really interesting time where we can really reset and get back to a much healthier work culture in every single industry, in every single organization. That includes and starts with better pay, but to your point, more time with your families. less time on the job. The expectation that people are going to show up and deal with traffic on a Friday, right? That's not going to happen. You're not going to have a workforce if you make people come to the office on a Friday. And you may not have a workforce, you make them come to the office on a Monday. Like the 3-day work week may become the gold standard, but these are the conversations that the biggest employers should be having, and they should be including the employees in those conversations. It should be employee led, and they should be dictating what the terms of the next decades are going to be in terms of what it means to be an employee of an organization.
I mean, if you think about it, there are so many benefits to the business also. If you think about just purely capitalist and P&L, right? If I don't have to house 300 people in a building that I have to pay lease for 10 years because I cannot get any short-term leases, I have to pay for that much, and light and utility and HR and all of those kinds of things, right? All of those things, if I don't need to, why do I need to spend money on that? I could spend it on, I don't know, employee training,
Exactly.
bonuses. I mean, there are so many other things I could be doing to increase the likelihood that I could become an employer of choice, that people will say, oh, you know what? They will treat me well. I would rather take a 10% cut and go there, and work there because I'm going to be treated nicely and I'm going to have time with my family. That's and exactly I can work from anywhere.
And to be clear, the answers to the test are out there. You have to ask the questions. Like, you would be shocked at how many people are trying to solve these in vacuums and silos. The reality is your workforce may very well be willing to take a pay cut for a work at home experience. And you may not even know that. I don't think this is an issue where structural costs just go up, especially on the labor side. I think it's more of just a P&L and a geography conversation where you're just shifting dollars from one area to another. And I don't think it's net going to be more expensive. Like, we run a very reasonable labor cost and we're paying more, right? But we're making up for it in lower turnover, higher productivity, right? And then it feels good to be a better, but we make up for it, right? And higher top line sales. If you can keep people in restaurants, it's the greatest way to drive year over year increases. We call them comp sales in retail. It's the greatest way to drive comp sales and keep the people in the building. They'll be better with your customers. Right? When you're a customer, when you walk into a restaurant and someone knows you, you feel good. I know it's the Cheers thing and we talk about it all the time, but it's just a better experience when someone starts making your food, knowing what it is that you are going to order before you have to speak. It's like pouring out the beer that's the type of stuff that I think is incredibly important. It really, really, really helps. But getting back to the underlying and fundamental issue here is that there's a massive opportunity for workers to unite and to dictate the going forward terms of their employment at every industry, at every level. And that's a very good thing. And for companies, it's also a very good thing, to your point, because let's reset this the right way so it works for everybody, because there are win-wins everywhere. We have to ask the questions. We have to be engaged. You can't assume you know what people want. You got to include them in the process. And I think it's going to be so much better for this country, so much healthier for this country, and we will get better collective results.
You mentioned, and I want to get back to that comment about you text message everyone text messages. I do want you to tell me about that, but also, are there things that as you scaled up, there were certain things that you may be heartbroken, right? But you had to leave it behind because it just could not scale for whatever reason. Were there incidents like that?
Yeah, I mean, look, the creative side of my brain is constantly firing. Anyone that, works with me, will be the first one to raise their hands, and they'll be like, he's got a lot of crazy in there. I think on the innovation side, it's been a lot of narrowing versus widening, right? Doing fewer things, but with significantly more intention. And I think the cool thing with scale is you actually see the results of a more narrowed focus, right? It's like Chipotle. Like, Chipotle didn't introduce LTOs, right, or new ingredients until they were about 20 years old. And from that perspective, they just wanted to make sure, and give Steve Ells all the credit in the world, just cook the chicken right? Just like get the core product right every single time, and you'll have a rabid customer base and rabid fan base of people that, want to support you and do support you. And so it's been a lesson for me around less is more, turning off some of the creative juices and going like a heck of a lot deeper and focusing the creative there versus, the new bright, shiny toy or object that's constantly over here, right? Getting me to go like this. It's like, no, focus. Like what does creative look like when you're going a mile deep and an inch wide versus the opposite of that? And that's a complete different way to really approach it and to think about it. And it's fun, but it was really hard for me to give up, right, the bright, shiny new toy type stuff, because that gets me excited day in and day out. So that's been the biggest, the creative compromise and reshaping what an actually creative-led company is when you're going for scale, because it's different than something a heck of a lot smaller where you could be doing all kinds of crazy, right, innovation day in and day out.
Well, with scalability, one of your non-negotiable off the plate was maintaining purpose at scale. So how did you manage to keep that going at now? You're saying that by the end of next year, it would be over 100 locations, right? Well over 100 locations.
Yeah, look, there's two reasons for that. And it's actually gotten easier. The first is that as you have more systems in place, right, it's easier to follow a system than not. But the biggest is the talent, right? We have a fantastic, president, Andy Hooper, who is a human resources professional. And to have a human resources professional be, right, the guy running the day-to-day operations of the company as the president of the organization, right, that is a massive win, right? We have an unbelievable management team, right? Bridget Siegel, chief operating officer, she was both a chef and a banker, like fantastic human being. John Rietmeyer, our CFO, fantastic guy. Darian Bates, brilliant technological mind, right? Running the technology. By the way, the list goes on and on and on and on, like unbelievable. We've got Sarah Ortiz, who was the head of human resources at Five Guys that just joined us. But we've got an incredible management team that, Sabir, they care as much about the purpose as I do. And they're constantly figuring out how we solve for that at scale. And then we just hired a woman, Katie Bach, who she ran strategy at Starbucks, but she was the managing partner of the Good Jobs Institute. Literally wrote the playbook, right, on what it means to be a good jobs provider. And now we are rewriting kind of Enlightened Hospitality 2.0. All of the things that we talked about, it's going to first be a white paper, then it's likely going to turn into, something much larger than that. But you have real people that go to work on the purpose, and then you use technology and use software as a facilitator of that. So as I mentioned before, if I want to communicate with our staff, right, I could literally have sent out 5 messages to our staff while we were on this interview, having this conversation, because it's press a button, it goes to everyone communicate with me directly. So from that perspective, it's just like very quick, fast, real human, right, comms that feels very one-to-one, but you're always on. And that's how people, when I tell people about it, it took a while for HR team, but just communicate to people like they're human beings. Like you can have typos. It doesn't have to go through 3 stages of approval. Like people aren't expecting that. They just want to know that you're there, that you care, that you're thinking about them, that they can access you, right? As a result of that. And so that's the type of stuff where the most simple thing is acknowledge people, right? Like our company meeting used to be about the things we wanted to get done every single week. Now it's all hands. And the one thing that we do is we try to incorporate everyone's name that we can as often and as frequent as we can. It is one giant rah, because and you should see the attendance, right? Attendance has spiked as a result of that because people want to hear the shout outs. And it's all about positivity and promoting positivity. That is where
recognition.
Yeah. And that's where this is going, by the way. I think the smartest thing that every brand can do is embrace optimism, right? As they're one of their values, because that's what the world needs right now. We don't need everyone's been through a really rough 18 months, right? There's a lot of uncertainty out there. Optimism. But software and technology, it helps enable one-to-one communication. It drives purpose because there's deeper connectivity, right, to the people doing the work, and then including those people in the process and having real dollars to invest in things that can change impact at scale, right? We can actually go spend a real portion of our dollars and time on good jobs for food service, and we can dedicate a team to that. And also, I would be we have a fantastic How I Met You, right? Matt Higgins, RSE, among many other things that he does, a fantastic supportive investor base that believes in.
He's an incredible human being too. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is what every company needs, like financial sponsors and that believe in what you're doing, because without it, the company will rip apart at the seams. And a true commitment to a long-term vision and being willing to make the necessary investments along the way, being willing to invest in software when no one knew, right, that we were going to have a massive structural shift from analog to digital, right, in the industry, right? Being able to invest in higher wages, right, before people knew that go up unless you paid them higher wages, right? Willing to invest in non-traditional benefits. There's real costs associated with that, right? Knowing that that was going to be the glue, right, that got people, right, to the company and kept them there. And on and on and on and on and on of all the things that we've done that have created this body of work that makes us very relevant, more relevant today than we were 10 years ago. And so the vision is actually getting bigger as the company is growing, and and not to mention the fact that everything is getting better, right? The food quality is getting better because we can make bigger investments. Our operating system is getting better. The software is getting better. Everything, and that's very rare because oftentimes as you get bigger, the opposite happens, which is, it's the death of 1,000 cuts. You have a slightly worse operation. We're seeing the opposite of that. So I'm super pumped and super excited about, as we get into the hundreds, like what can this company be, both in terms of like large scale impact, but also, what can we be? What product can we create? And how can we have a lot of fun while we're doing it?
I mean, thank you for sharing your incredible journey, especially from where you came from to where we are today. I always ask my guests for their number one insight into Michael's journey. Your $100,000, you've already delivered $1 million worth of insights here. What is your number one $100,000 expert insight into the entrepreneurial journey and what you have learned that you could share with others who are on that journey?
Be fearlessly weird. And I say that because the world does not need a version of someone else's idea, right? The world needs your ideas, new ideas, and your personality. And so like lean into it in a way like you've never before. Cut the generic shit out. Be yourself. Be fearlessly weird. I can't tell you the amount of weird things that we do as a brand that have defined who we are as a company. And it's those things that you never want to lose sight of, because they will ultimately be the intellectual property that makes what you're doing so much more special and so much more value add to everyone that joins you on that journey. And I will preach that to the day that I'm dead. But as entrepreneurs, stop chasing your tail, stop chasing the bright, shiny object out there. Do it because it's authentic, because you care deeply about change and impact, and it's your idea. It's not that much fun to just make money or to just be successful as an entrepreneur unless you're really doing it in a way that's truly authentic and unique. That's where you get unbelievable positivity, and it feels really awesome.
Michael, thank you for being here. Thank you for being you, and really appreciate you. And thank you, audience, for tuning in and going through Michael's journey with us.
Thanks for sharing my gospel, Sabir. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. And next week we have Gary V, and we're talking about NFTs. It will be an exciting episode. It was going to be power packed. Thank you, Michael, for being here.
Thanks, Sabir.